99% get Buddhism wrong. It is not just rational. You need faith. Sometimes it seems like the Buddha had all the fun. In his meditation, he got to survey the world, the whole world. As for us, he tells us when we meditate, focus on your breath. We don't get to move around that much. We don't get to expand our horizons. We have to narrow our horizons. But those two facts are connected, because when the Buddha surveyed the world, he surveyed it several times. The first 2 times, the lesson kept coming back. Look into your awareness of the present moment. Look into what the mind is doing right here, right now, because that's going to solve the problems you see when you survey the world. The first time he surveyed the world, he saw it as being like a stream drying up. There were fish in the stream, fighting one another over the water. No matter who won out, they were all going to die anyhow. It all seemed pointless. Then he looked around. He said that every place he could look for happiness, somebody had already laid claim to it. If he was going to find his happiness outside, he'd have to fight somebody off, just like the fish. So he looked inside. He saw that there was an arrow in the heart. If you could pull that arrow out, then you'd be free from the suffering. So the problem is not with the world. The problem is in the heart. On the night of his awakening, when he surveyed the world again, he had already seen his previous births, going up and down on all sorts of levels. The question was there a pattern? He saw that there was. All beings pass away, and then are reborn in line with their karma. Their karma depends on their views, and their views depend on who they listen to. He also saw the complex way karma worked itself out. It wasn't the case that if you did something this lifetime, it would automatically lead to a certain type of rebirth next time around. You were simply adding it to your karmic mix. Then, at the moment of rebirth, there were choices you had to make, and they could change your immediate course. So the final upshot of that second survey of the world was, look at the mind in the present moment, because that's where the important choices are being made. After his awakening, he surveyed the world again, this time with the eye of an awakened one. He saw beings on fire with the fires of greed, aversion, and delusion, but his fires were out. So his relationship to the world was very different this time around. Now, he was free. The first time around, there was a sense of terror, samvega, because he was trapped in this world. But after his awakening, he was freed, totally free, to the point where, if he had decided not to teach, he still wouldn't be in debt to anybody. He didn't owe anybody anything. So if he had decided not to teach, nobody could do anything about it. But as we know, Sahampati Brahma got upset. Here, the Buddha had been devoting all that time and energy to developing the perfections to become a teaching Buddha, and now he was going to change his mind. So Sahampati came down and pleaded with the Buddha, "Please teach. There are those with little dust in their eyes. They'll understand." So the Buddha surveyed the world again, this time with an eye to seeing if there was anyone who would respond to his teaching and benefit from it. He saw that there was, which is why he decided to teach, even though it was going to involve a lot of difficulties. When you read the story of his life, even just the section in the Vinaya, you see all the problems that the monks and nuns created for him. And those were the people who were supposedly his disciples. On top of that, he had to deal with sectarians of other kinds. Here he was, offering them a path to the end of suffering, and they didn't like it. They would attack him. That's the way it is with the human world. There's a lot of ingratitude, but there are people who will benefit from the Dhamma. So it's up to us to decide which category we're going to be in and to take to heart the lessons he learned. With every survey of the world before his awakening, his focus had to come back into the present moment each time. So ask yourself, do you have that arrow in your heart that the Buddha was talking about? The arrow that keeps you running after things that you're going to have to fight for? Kurt Vonnegut could imagine a world in which beings didn't have to feed off of one another, didn't have to compete with one another. The planet Mercury, he said, was a honeycombed crystal that sang because one side faced the heat of the sun, while the other side faced the intense cold of outer space. Little beings called harmoniums fed off the vibrations of the crystal, instead of feeding off one another, so they were always filled with empathetic joy for themselves and for all the other harmoniums on the planet. But that was just in Kurt Vonnegut's imagination. The world we have is one where there's going to be competition. There's going to be struggle, because we all engage in the type of thinking that the Buddha called papanka. It's a hard word to translate, but basically it's the kind of thinking that starts with the perception, I am the thinker. With that perception, you've taken on an identity, and once you've taken on an identity as a being, you have to feed. Where are you going to feed? You're going to feed in the world, and guess what? There are other beings out there feeding in the same world, and not only that, they're often feeding off of one another. Some of them want to feed off of you. There's bound to be conflict, often pretty brutal. So as you take on an identity in that way, you're putting yourself in a position where you have to get into conflict, all because of the way you think. This is how you're going to learn what really is harmless and what's not. You can have lots of preconceived notions about what a particular act will do, but unless you try it out, you're not going to know. To teach, even though it was going to involve a lot of difficulties. When you read the story of his life, even just the section in the Vinaya, you see all the problems that the monks and nuns created for him. And those were the people who were supposedly his disciples. On top of that, he had to deal with Arians of other kinds. Here he was, offering them a path to the end of suffering, and they didn't like it. They would attack him. That's the way it is with the human world. There's a lot of ingratitude, but there are people who will benefit from the Dhamma. So it's up to us to decide which category we're going to be in and to take to heart the lessons he learned. With every survey of the world before his awakening, his focus had to you're doing this to clear the decks, because eventually you'll want to see how those thoughts form, the ones that pull you away, that want to go back to more papanka, and from a still mind, you can see what motivates them, the arrow that the Buddha talked about. So as you're here right now, if there are any thoughts of who you are or what world you're in, just put them aside. You might think of a picture of the globe, covered with one of those cancel symbols, the circle with the line through it. No worlds, just events. That's how you learn to take these things apart, because once those worlds are formed, you want either to maintain them or to destroy them. In either case, you're going to have passion for the maintenance or passion for the destruction, and that passion will create more becoming and then more becoming. But if you just look at the events that would lead up to becoming, if there has to be a becoming, let it be the becoming of concentration, where you're focused on your inner world, where there's no conflict aside from your own inner conflict. At least you don't have to fight other people off. No one else is pushing you off to the side so that they can get a better view of your breath. You've got the breath and your mind as you experience it from within, all to yourself, and you get to see what's going on simply in terms of events. Learn how to survey this inner world in these terms, and the Buddha promises that you'll be able to get out of that sense of entrapment in the outer world, so that someday you too can survey the world from an awakened perspective with a sense of being freed from it. If you have something to offer to the world at that point, fine. It's a free gift. But even if you don't, you've still accomplished a great deal. The world of conviction. Sometimes you read that the Buddha was a really nice guy. He had some interesting ideas. He didn't push them on anybody. He didn't think that they were necessarily true for anyone else, but they had worked for him and they might work for you. He didn't mean them as absolute truths. But when you actually look at his teachings and the claims he made, that he achieved unexcelled supreme self-awakening, and he had tested it from many angles, the fact that he didn't push his ideas on people didn't mean that he wasn't 100% sure about them. It's simply that he realized that he wasn't anyone's creator, he wasn't anyone's father, aside from Rahula, so he wasn't in a position to make demands of you. But he was sure that if you were sincere in putting his teachings to the test, you would find that they were true. All he asked was that you had enough conviction that you'd be willing to give them a fair test. Here again, there's a lot of misinformation out there, that there's no faith in Buddhism. It's all very rational. But even rational teachings require some faith, require some conviction. And in this case, it requires a fair amount. You're going to be sitting here, focusing on your breath, restraining yourself from doing a lot of other things you would rather do. You hold to the precepts, again, restraining yourself from doing things you'd rather do. So you have to have some sense, at least, that it's worth it. After all, the Buddha's teachings are hopeful. Think of it. He talks about the total end of suffering, and that it can be done through human effort. So, you have to start with a sense of confidence in the power of your... We're told that insight is seeing things in terms of the three characteristics or the three perceptions of inconstancy, stress, and not self. Those are basically standards for judgment. You don't have to repeat those words to yourself. Just look at what you're doing, see where you're creating a sense of well-being, and then ask yourself, is it good enough? Humming of concentration, where you're focused on your inner world, where there's no conflict, aside. The commentators get tied into knots about this story. The idea that the Buddha could even entertain the notion of not teaching others bothers them. But it's related to the fact that when you gain full awakening, you're totally free of debt, with no obligation to anybody. Yet, even in that state of no obligation, he had the compassion to teach and to go through all that effort, walking all over northern India for 45 years, teaching the Dharma, establishing the Vinaya, establishing his fourfold parisa, monks, nuns, lay followers, male lay followers, female lay followers. That was a lot of work, so think about that. Here's someone who's gone through all that effort to show the path to total freedom. We live in a world where that path has been shown. What does that mean about us? It means that we have the capability to follow that path. And if we have any sense of gratitude at all, we should really give ourselves to the path. This requires that we straighten out a lot of things inside our minds, because we have many different identities. A lot of them would rather not be bothered. They'd be perfectly content to live an ordinary life. But then there's that part of the mind that would like to be free and feels so stifled by conventional society, conventional values. There's a large part of society that wants to teach you how to treat that part of your mind with disrespect. Years back, there was a movie called The Devils about a priest and a nun in the Middle Ages. In the first scene, the nun's walking around with her head off to one side at a 90-degree angle because she's so warped from not having given herself over to natural desires. You could tell where the movie was going, so I walked out, because it seemed so unhealthy to treat the idea that the mind that desires purity, the mind that desires a true happiness, should be mocked. But it wasn't just that one movie. It's a theme throughout our society. Making fun of people who want to keep their virtue pure. Making fun of people who want to find a happiness that doesn't involve sensuality. The Buddha's saying that if you give respect to the part of the mind that wants genuine happiness, a happiness that's totally harmless, you will benefit. So, he's asking you to assume the identity of someone who wants genuine happiness. That will require that you sort out any of your other identities that don't fall in line with that desire, that feel threatened by it. This is what the teaching on not self is for, to realize that the different identities that you have been gathered from who knows where, lots of different places, lots of different situations in which you observe yourself taking on a particular desire and getting some benefit from it. Sometimes you observed accurately, sometimes not. The fact that the observations were not accurate doesn't mean that those particular senses of self are going to be weak, though. Sometimes they're the most tenacious. This will require sorting through your many selves and learning how to disidentify from those that really are not in your true best interest. But it's a noble task. That's the other feature of the Buddha's teachings, that it confers nobility on all the people who practice it. There's the convention of nobility that's based on birth, based on family inheritance, which is always very questionable. Where did they get all that money? Are they really worthy of honor? That's not the kind of nobility the Buddha's talking about. He's talking about the nobility of a mind that wants to find a happiness that doesn't die and is willing to do whatever is needed to find it, as long as it causes no harm. The truths that inform that path are also noble. Someone once asked, "What's noble about clinging? What's noble about craving?" What's noble about them is not so much the clinging or the craving in themselves, but the attitude that the Buddha's truths about these things advise. You realize that your suffering is not caused by anything outside. There may be bad things happening outside, but the fact that the mind is suffering comes from your own actions, your own clingings and cravings. So you're taking responsibility and learning to step back from the very things you cling to, you hold on to, and say, I need to comprehend these things so that I have no more passion for them. That's what's noble about the first noble truth. The same with the second noble truth. You step back from your craving. You realize, I have to abandon this craving for sensuality, the fascination with thinking about and planning sensual pleasures, craving for becoming, taking on more identities, craving for non-becoming, craving to destroy any identities you have that you don't like. The fact that you're willing to step back and abandon them, that's what's noble about that truth. So this is the becoming that the Buddha has you assume through conviction as you take on the practice, that you live in a world where awakening is possible, true happiness is possible, release is possible, and you live in a world where you can become noble, and you have it within you to do so. We talk about the graduated discourse leading from mundane right view, the principle of karma, the goodness of generosity, and then taking you to transcendent right view, the Four Noble Truths. But it's also doing more. It's developing other factors in the path as well. You have a sense of well-being, but you also have a sense of heedfulness, the dangers of sensuality, and the desirability of looking for pleasure someplace else. The first archer comes. He sees the Buddha, and he's frozen with fear. He realizes that this is not something he really wants to do. Already, his fear shows that he has some sense of right and wrong. So the Buddha, this is one of those times when you wish the discourse was recorded, because precisely what the Buddha had to say on these topics is never recorded in the canon. You get the impression that, with each person, he would tailor his instructions to that particular person's needs. So you wonder what he would say to this archer about generosity.